A new poll from CNN is providing bad news for the White House and President Biden, who scores just a 39% approval rating a little more than a year before Election Day. 61% disapprove of Biden's job performance in the poll, and his approval rating is down from 45% in CNN's polling at the beginning of the year. The poll also finds former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley is the only Republican presidential candidate who is leading in a hypothetical matchup with Biden. The CNN poll conducted by SSRS found that Haley led Biden 49% to 43%, while every other major Republican candidate remains neck and neck with him. Those results are good news for Haley, a former United Nations ambassador under President Trump, who is looking to build on a strong performance in the first Republican presidential debate late last month to challenge her former boss for the Republican nomination. Haley is far behind Trump in polls of Republican primary voters, however, underscoring the uphill climb she faces. Still, the CNN poll suggests she'd be a better general election GOP nominee against Biden in her competition, a potential talking point as she makes her case in Iowa, New Hampshire, and other early primary and caucus states. A couple other GOP candidates were ahead of Biden in the CNN head-to-head polling. Former Vice President Mike Pence and Senator Tim Scott both won 46% support to Biden's 44% support in head-to-head matchups. Former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie won 44% to Biden's 42%, while Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, was tied with Biden, with each getting 47%. Entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy was behind Biden in a head-to-head matchup, 45% to 46%, while Trump held a one-point advantage of 47% to 46%. When asked about a potential rematch between Trump and Biden, 47% of respondents said they would choose the former president, and 46% said they would choose the current president. 5% said they would choose a different candidate, and 2% said they did not plan to vote. None of those figures are good for Biden, who ends up trailing 5 of the 7 GOP candidates in the polling. A big hang-up for voters with Biden appears to be the president's age. Biden is 80 and will turn 81 in November. Okay, I'm not going to read the rest of this because it just goes on and on and on and on. The important thing here is to talk about his polling in relation to these other candidates. Um, I also want to point out, because sometimes people don't understand certain things, these polls are not that big of a deal. One, because they're a year away from the election, and two, because general election polls, so ones that don't go state by state, show something that is pretty obvious without actually telling you what the result of the election will be. So Biden is most likely going to win the popular vote. That's just been the trend with Democrats. They win the popular vote. Maybe they don't win the elections. They don't get the electoral college. But what I'm getting at is polls like this don't show you how well Biden or any of these Republican candidates are doing in specific states. So it's not anything to get that worked up about. It's just telling you, like, in general, what percentage of the country likes that person, what percentage doesn't. But I said all the way back in February that Haley would probably be the most formidable person to run against Biden. And I do feel very much vindicated when I see polling like this. Uh, and it was just kind of funny because the points I made back then were that normal, regular voters, people who don't follow this stuff daily, weekly, monthly, just kind of like only tune in every 4 years for the election, and then even then they really only tune in for some of the debates and maybe vote on election day, and that's pretty much their whole role in the campaign. A lot of normal, regular people would look at someone like Haley and see a nice, looking, kind of outspoken lady that doesn't seem to be too extreme. Okay, she wants to cut Medicare and Social Security so that our kids can get on it later on, even though the actual purpose is much more sinister. And she's, of course, going to downplay wanting to raise the retirement age because that's going to piss off some older voters. But the point is that regular people would look at her and not see, evil incarnate, or any of her, like, actual awful policy ideas. And I think that's a big part of why she's leading Biden by, what is that, 6 points in this poll from over a year before the election. And to her credit, she knows it too, because I've seen some interviews she's done recently where she's talked about Biden is afraid of me. I would crush him. A vote for Biden is a vote for Kamala. Just she's on the warpath in terms of trying to make herself seem very scary. But her biggest issue, and it's one that everybody knows, is okay. Let's say the polling is accurate. You are the Republican candidate who has the best chance of beating Biden, which I personally believe. How in the world are you going to defeat Trump in that primary? You've been running for half a year and you've been trailing him by double digits ever since. So unless she can do three, four more debate performances during the debates for the each month until the election that are just killer, knock out the parks, and people start dropping out, I just don't see her being able to compete. But I'm very serious when I say that. Like, when I look at some of these polls, it makes she has a bigger case to, like, people are still trying to save DeSantis, but her and Ramaswamy have received the most growth out of anyone from what I can tell since they got in this race. Of course, they got in earlier than everybody else, so maybe that's a factor. But I think the two of them should definitely stay in for the time being. It's just kind of funny that Ramaswamy was talking about leading Trump in beating Biden in a landslide, a Reagan 1980 style landslide. Yeah, and then you look at the polling and he's trailing. But again, it's like he could still win the general election, right? Someone who doesn't get the popular vote can win. They're just not going to get a landslide. They're going to claw their way to razor thin victories in maybe, Florida, Pennsylvania. Of course, Ohio will be competitive for him because he's from there. But my point is that it's really comedic that he was talking all that stuff about how he was going to just wallop Biden, but I don't think so. This polling says otherwise. What's really interesting as well is that DeSantis arguably, because there's been a lot of commentary about how, like, awful of a governor he is and fascist, all terms like that. You could almost make the argument that if he gets out, like, if he's the nominee, he encourages a lot of voter turnout. And I think part of the reason for that is because Florida is now considered a red state, but not so red that if enough Democratic voters or people that could be swayed to vote for Democrats voted, they couldn't turn it back blue for the moment. It's kind of like how Arizona and Georgia are kind of like purple leaning, but they could still go one way or the other depending on how much turnout there is. I think he would probably cause the most turnout because of his home state. And the part with Biden and Christie is hilarious because there's going to be, if Christie is somehow miraculously able to win the primary, which I don't think he will, I think he might get New Hampshire at best, and that's it. A lot of Republican voters are going to be like, oh, well, they screwed Trump, I'm done. So I think pretty much any of these other candidates besides DeSantis, has a very good chance of stopping people from wanting to vote because they're going to feel just disillusioned because their dear leader didn't win. But the Haley thing is interesting because it's something I said all the way back in February. It's just that I don't really trust her to, what's the way of putting it, to be able to actually make it to a general election. I think she's going to get creamed in this primary unless something radically different happens in the next 5 months, and I don't think it will. But it's interesting because, I do think there are Republicans who have an excellent chance of getting back the White House. They just have this impossible challenge of overcoming the person who basically is the mascot of their party.